I recently posted a video on why the 747-8 is a success despite slow sales. In that video, I briefly mentioned that the 787's competitor is the A330neo. And then I started to get a whole lot of comments like these. People were insisting the 787's real competitor was the A350. It seems like this belief is widely held throughout the YouTube aviation community. A simple search of 787 versus A350 yields a whole lot of videos directly comparing the two. But I'm here to set the record straight. The 787 and A350 are not direct competitors. Let me explain. To better understand this misconception, we're going to have to go back to the days when these planes were nothing more than concepts. Boeing launched the 787 program back in 2004 and promised a plane that would bring about radical change to commercial aviation. It would feature moonshot technologies, including the use of composite materials in its fuselage and wings. Ultimately, this would result in an ultra-efficient mid-sized jet. The heavy use of composites was a massive risk, but the resulting fuel savings were tantalizing. Japan's largest airline, ANA, placed an order for 50 787s on launch day at a list price of $6 billion. Up to that point, this deal represented the largest launch day order in aviation history. Airbus, of course, felt pressure to respond. Soon thereafter, the company launched the A350, a mid-sized jet meant to compete directly with the 787. But it turns out what they were offering wasn't nearly as impressive. Rather than being an all-new jet, early A350 designs looked a lot more like a revamped A330. It took the A330's outdated fuselage and added new wings and engines. While this made the jet a whole lot cheaper to design and build, it also made it significantly less efficient than its rival. Over the course of the next 2 years, airlines really didn't seem that receptive to this A350 concept. In fact, the jet had some pretty outspoken critics, none more important than Steve Udvar-Hazy. As the CEO of one of the world's largest aircraft lessors, he publicly lambasted the jet as a band-aid response to the 787. Facing increasing levels of scrutiny, Airbus went back to the drawing board. What came out of that redesign was a completely different airplane, now marketed as the A350 XWB. It featured a lot of the same cutting-edge innovations that made the 787 special. New engines, larger windows, an improved cabin interior, and most importantly, widespread use of carbon composites. Ultimately, it is these technological similarities that have tricked people into thinking that the A350 and 787 are direct competitors. Both Boeing and Airbus have heavily marketed just how advanced these new wide-bodies are, particularly when it comes to their use of composites. Considering no other planes have used composites to this extent, it's created the perception that the A350 and 787 are one and the same. However, this conclusion neglects a major decision that Airbus decided to make when redesigning the A350. They decided to make it bigger. By the time Airbus came to the realization that it needed to redesign the jet, Boeing had already racked up hundreds of orders for the 787. With substantial market share already lost, Airbus refocused the plane's purpose, setting its sights on the larger Boeing 777. This was a smart move when you consider the new timeline for the A350's release. Airbus announced that the XWB's new entry into service date would be sometime in 2013. By that time, the 777 program would be nearly 2 decades old, meaning many early units would be nearing retirement age. As such, Airbus explicitly targeted 777 customers, promoting the A350 as an ideal replacement. Look no further than Delta for validation of this approach. A long-time 777 operator, Delta just recently retired their entire 777 fleet and will be replacing them with A350s. Okay, that's all great backstory, but just how much bigger are A350s than 787s? Well, it's not all that easy to tell by just looking at them, since they're both wide-body twin jets. However, when we build a chart detailing seating capacity, the picture becomes a whole lot clearer. For the most part, we can see the A350 carries more passengers than the 787. The only potential for overlap is between the 787-10 and the A350-900, with only about a 25-seat gap separating the two. It's true that these two variants do compete to some degree, but the families as a whole don't. To drive this point home, let's build some weighted averages. A weighted average will tell us what the capacity is for any given 787 or A350 when taking into account the relative popularity of each variant. I'll spare you the details on the math, but essentially what our calculation tells us is that any given A350 flying today carries on average 334 passengers. This is 62 more than the average 787, which carries 272 passengers. Because of this size discrepancy, we often see these two jets utilized on different types of long-haul routes. Let's take a look at Qatar Airways, for instance, an airline that operates both the 787 and A350. Its 787 flies from its hub in Doha to a lot of smaller airports, including the likes of Cardiff, Gothenburg, Hanoi, Colombo, and Kigali. While their A350 is also featured on a few thin routes, it mostly flies into larger airports, including the likes of Singapore, Boston, Tokyo, Sydney, and Zurich. The point is that the 787 size is better optimized to profitably fly thin routes, while the A350 is better suited to connect large cities in a highly efficient manner. So hopefully now you have a better understanding of how the 787 and A350 actually stack up against each other. When looking through the lens of innovation or customer experience, sure, the A350 and 787 compete. But if you're an airline, the difference in capacity means the A350 and 787 are not interchangeable. As such, these two planes are not direct competitors. Now, I don't really want to start a firestorm in the comments, but I'm going to ask the question anyway because I'm curious. Do you guys prefer the 787 or the A350? Personally, I'm going to reserve judgment because I have only flown on the 787, but I'm curious what your opinions are. Thank you so much to my patrons for helping to support this video, and as always, if you learned something new today, leave a like and subscribe to keep learning. And until I see you again, don't forget to look up.